Good evening. Welcome to the October 24th, 2017 meeting of the Millis School Committee. I will start by announcing that this meeting is being recorded and can be viewed on Mondays at 7 o'clock on Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 37. Next, we'll do a roll call vote. Carrie?
Here.
Denise is not here tonight. I'm here. Superintendent?
Present.
Steve?
Present.
Jen?
Present.
Bernadette?
Here.
Keith? Josh?
Present.
Jody, do we have anybody sign in for open session?
Do not.
All right. We'll skip the action items now, and we'll actually start with student representatives.
The term ends November 3rd, so students have to get in their work by then. The grades will close. Senior project proposals have been going on yesterday. They've continued today and will continue into tomorrow. And they're presenting to the English department. There was a blood drive yesterday, Monday the 23rd. That went well. As well yesterday was volleyball for a cure. And then tomorrow, October 25th, a Wednesday, Common Ground is having a breakfast. And then singer-songwriter Rabel, who is a transgender advocate, is coming in as well.
All schools have an early release day on November 2nd, and that is for parent, teacher, and guardian conferences from 12:30 to 2:30. The Clyde Brown is having their evening conferences this week on October 25th. They have an ongoing candy corn guessing contest at the library of Clyde Brown. And third grade field trip for Plymouth is this Thursday. In the middle school, the grade 8 is starting the Thanksgiving community project for the Millis Food Pantry, and they're having their evening parent-teacher conferences Thursday. And at the high school, on November 8th, the 10th graders will be interviewing veterans. Veterans Day is that Friday, and the interviews will take place in the cafeteria from 9:30 to 10:20. And any veterans in the community that are willing to volunteer to participate, contact Dave Fallon. He is looking for some more volunteers. The boosters are having a 5K costume run October 29th.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll next move to the Superintendents Report. NASDAQ Award.
Yes, I'd like to ask Allie Smith and her family to please join us at the table. Yeah, you can sit if you'd like. So it is my pleasure to invite Allison Smith and her family here tonight for the NASDAQ Award, the National School Development Council Award for Academic Growth and Student Leadership. Allie has been a leader in the classroom, on the athletic field, and in the community at Millis High School. As a three-sport athlete, Allison will graduate with an impressive total of 12 varsity letters combined in ice hockey, volleyball, and tennis. She's been an active member of our school community, has been a class representative, the vice president of the National Honor Society, a leader in the LEOS organization. She was chosen to represent our school sophomore year at the HOBY, the Hugh O'Brien Youth Conference, has been part of our peer leaders and the SAD organization, Students Against Destructive Decisions, and participated in the Metro West Youth and Philanthropy program freshman year. Allie has volunteered in the community through a variety of endeavors, including Meals on Wheels for the Council on Aging, the St. Jude's Walk, Christmas in the City, and the Special Olympics. I personally got to know Allie a little bit better on our trip last spring to Peru, and she was full of enthusiasm, never a word of complaint, even in very challenging situations at altitude and with different foods and life experiences that we all loved, but Allie was a true leader and trooper and really brought a lot of joy to that trip. So it's our pleasure, Allie, to honor you here tonight.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, picture. If you don't mind, family, may we forget. Well, yeah, we can use your phone. Take that for. Thank you for that reminder.
Yes.
You don't want me in front.
You get right next to her. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Now home to homework.
Unless you want to give her a pass.
Her to the award.
All right. Action items. We have one set of minutes, our October 17th minutes
Mr. Chair,
for approval. Mr. Catalano.
I make a motion to approve the October 17, 2017 school committee meeting minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And next, we will move to the time and learning portion. So we have three
We're
presentations.
going to start this evening, Mr. Chair, with a brief overview of the MCAS data by Joan Lynn, our Director of Curriculum, Professional Development, Assessment, Title I, ELL, and the kitchen sink. Because of the changes in MCAS this year, we thought it was important to provide this information to the public.
So thank you very much for having us here tonight. And I know Nancy has shared some information with you last night. So last week when she was doing some presentation, basically in the last 20 years, MCAS has not been updated and revised. And over the last few years, we've been looking at MCAS versus PARC and the whole big conversation. And on the state level, the Department of Ed felt very strongly that indeed our MCAS that we had been working with for the past 20 years was far superior, and they felt that it was best to come up with a next generation MCAS as opposed to moving to a PARC or to not do anything and just stay with the previous one. So basically, it really does focus in on our critical thinking abilities and application of knowledge, as well as making connections between reading and writing. The connection between reading and writing is a natural one. Any teacher would tell you if you're struggling with writing, then your reading might be affected, as well as vice versa. So those kinds of connections are very purposeful, and the idea of how do we help our students to be able to look into text and to be able to understand fully what they're reading and how to go back to the data to support the facts. The other piece that was different is that some of the students in the state of Massachusetts took it as an online test, and others took it as a paper test. Some districts were given a pass if their districts were not up to speed in order to do the technology component, but our expectation here in the state of Massachusetts is indeed that we will move forward. The piece that I think is clear in looking at MCAS is when that first started to come about in 1996-ish as a result of ed reform, is that it only really started in three grade levels. It was 4, 8, and 10. And what happened was that they sort of added the tests in between, they expanded it until it became what we've known in our past, but there was no direct correlation between level of difficulty when they were inserting these tests. And I think what the best part about this is that they really did a thorough look and a standardization of making sure there was a progression, that there was some reason and rationale between the 3rd grade test moving to the 4th grade test moving to the 5th grade, whereas before it was almost like a just plop a test in there, and there was a lot of discrepancy around the idea of level of difficulty as well as what we were asking our students to do. The one piece, we're just getting this information, so I feel like as the Maureen and Jason go into their improvement plans a little bit later, we're just starting to really digest what these tests mean. But Nancy and I have certainly participated, as well as the principals, in some webinars as well as some meetings. And I think one of the pieces from the Department of Ed is really looking at this as a very different test. One of the analogies that I loved was the fact that they talked about we cannot compare what was our legacy test of advanced, proficient, needs improvement, and warning to the new categories. Yeah, there's 4 of the old categories, there's 4 of the new, but there is not a direct correlation. And they want to make sure that we are very clear in not saying you were advanced before, so therefore you're exceeding expectations. So for us, this is a baseline test. This is the ability for us to have a pause and for us to go forward. I think one of the key pieces, there was an article in the Boston Globe last week that really was not an accurate portrayal. The headlines were something like, students in Massachusetts do worse. And the analogy the Department of Ed gave that really solidified it for me is, we could say this room is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If we start saying that's equal to 19 degrees Celsius, it doesn't make the room any colder, doesn't make it any hotter. It's just 2 different units of measure of how we're looking at that. And that was sort of the piece of looking at this, is that our kids didn't do worse in the state of Massachusetts with the new tests. The tests were reporting the results differently, and that's what we need to be careful about. So I think the analogy of what that looks like was really helpful. Again, looking at the results, it doesn't mean that they learned less. It just simply means that this was a different way of assessing students. And as we begin to look at them and we begin to report out more, and our teachers begin to really get into what is the data telling us, how do we move forward with that, I think that that will be key for us to look at what we're doing and how we're doing it differently. So you have these packets in there, so I'm not going to repeat this. And again, it's the principals are going to share some information with you. I think one of the other pieces, too, was that they spent a lot of time and energy. They had 120 educators from the state of Massachusetts coming in to standardize the answers. What would be an appropriate answer for a 4th grader meeting the needs on this question? So these were evaluated, and the decision was made as to what made that cut score based on educators from Massachusetts sitting in over the summer and really standardizing the answers and the expectations. And I think the piece that they really looked at was, how did these panel of educators really come to a decision, and how did they negotiate what was indeed the correct answer for some of these questions. So I think that that's key. I think it's important for us to remind staff as well as families that these were educators in the state of Massachusetts, each working on all of these tests and how they standardized it. You're all parents. You're going to be getting your students' results soon. Within the next couple of weeks, the results are going out, and they're going to look very different for you. They're actually going to look more on a continuum. So you're going to see where indeed your student, and in this example, it's the 541, where does your student, what is that score, and where does he fall on the continuum of what's going on? Okay, so again, I think Nancy shared the parent letter, but the state has put out a really fine letter in explaining all of these to families. We have work to do with also doing some parent information sessions, but the fact is that the state has really done a good job with explaining what's happening with Next Generation MCAS. Also keep in mind, Next Generation MCAS is only for grades 3 through 8 at this time, and it is not for 5 and 7 science. So 5 and 7 is legacy, so it's the old test, as is the high school test. The high school is legacy for the next 2 years, and part of that has to do with the high stakes that are involved with it. They're not going to turn around and start changing that Fahrenheit Celsius kind of measure for families, that this means whether or not your kid has passed MCAS in the state of Massachusetts with a more rigorous test. So that's going to be there for 2 more years. So high school will not be involved with next generation until 2020. So again, part of the letter that goes home and says, why did my student have a different score, or, only partially meeting when he may very well have been at advanced or proficient last year. And it's, again, a more rigorous test, and how do we look at it? One of the things that they were able to correlate was growth. And, you'd ask the question like, well, how do you have a baseline test and say there's no comparison without being able to have growth? And one of the pieces that they were very clear in their explanation to all of us was the fact that they still had the data. They just needed to convert the old data into the new terminology and make that math work so that they could do the correlations. So the next slide I'm showing you is the growth from last year in these areas.
Mr. Chair. Joan, could you just go back to that slide right there? So the third bullet point, looking
Yep.
closely at your score, if they're not meeting, or if they're close to or isn't close to meeting expectation, talk to your child's teacher. Shouldn't we be reaching out? Shouldn't either the teachers or the administrators proactively go after, as opposed to just waiting for where you have people in the 2 lower tiers, right? Because I know it's not an exact thing, but they're not going to be able to graduate, right? If they're at 10th grade, if they meet that when the standard.
Again, because we're not at that point for
Not
2
yet,
more
but
years.
eventually.
There will be a cut score at some point. They're not necessarily saying it's the way that cut score is for a sophomore.
But if you're in that third level,
Yeah.
you're in the gray area.
Well, it just means that you're just not there yet. It means what it means is that you still need some review before you're ready to tackle the grade level standards that you're at. So if you haven't, you might need some help going into 5th grade if you've received a lower score in 4th grade. So it really becomes a tool for the teachers to use to help identify what's the review your student needs in order to move on to the grade level standards.
Okay,
So
so getting
review.
to that point,
Yep.
shouldn't we be putting the onus on
Yeah.
the administrators and the teachers to reach out to these?
Well, it's funny because we were at a meeting just this afternoon talking exactly about this, and one of the pieces is what is that parent talking to your teacher, and for us to be talking to the parents, and what does that look like? Does that look like it becomes part of the parent-teacher conference where you're actually sharing that data? Does it look like it's reach out to a particular grade level because we don't think that a particular standard is where it needs to be? Is it looking at our Title I program or our tiered system of support, and how do we reach out to those family members to say it's a partnership? It's a triad. It's the student, it's the parents, it's the student, it's the family, and it's the school. What does that look like to turn around and support that child to be successful, and to potentially looking at that review? What does that student need to get up to speed on that grade level standard that they've been looking at? And it's a self-analysis. Are we not doing something with a standard, and therefore it's a level at a grade level that everybody is not where we want them to be? And that's some of the stuff that we're starting to look at now. We looked at some of our scores to say, were we below the state average on this? And so those are all of the pieces that we're just starting to digest. And, my trusty book with all of the reports and everything else is sort of like, how do you break that down? But you're absolutely right, Steve. So those are the questions that we still have to figure out as to what's the responsibility with the triad. Kid, family, school. So back to the growth. The growth standard has still been the same. It's the 40 to 60. So if you're looking across the center of that, so with the exception of grade 5, this is ELA. So with the exception of grade 5, which was at a 30%, we were at the expected growth comparing the legacy test to this new next generation test in ELA. And again, you go over the 60, it's making above expected progress. So, so with the, there's some questions that we need to ask, like what's going on. Oh, I know what else I wanted to mention to you, and I apologize for this being a little out of sequence. The question was raised as to how to compare a paper test, because some schools in the state did paper versions and some did online versions. And the standard is set for the online version. And that's because the technology standards that were used to take the test are embedded in the frameworks that we've been working with for a long time. So they set the standard so that they weren't lowering expectations based on the technology part, the online version, and they had to do some mathematical adjustment to the paper version so that they could talk the same talk, apples to apples, because the data can't be any different if we're talking about, well, the schools that did paper or the grade levels that did paper were at a disadvantage to the scoring. So, so that was important. And so for us, we did online in grades 4 and 8. This year, we're doing it in all grade levels. This year, we're preparing right now with the technology department to do it in grades 3 through 8. And it's, they're talking about when they're starting with the legacy still being online and whether or not the sophomores will be doing some of that online. So here's our math scores. And one of the things that I think what we always want to do is to celebrate the things that have gone well. If you remember some of our past growth scores, particularly in math, we struggled to get to expectations of what you would expect students to grow at. And when you're looking at grade 4, actually they were all at grade level expectations, for expected growth, with the exception of grade 5. Expected growth is 40, and we hit 39.5. So again, that's the only one that's not at expected growth. But when you look at grade 7 and you're at 76, sorry, I probably should have worn my glasses, 76, and you're looking at grade 8 at 79.5. Those are 16 and 19 and a half points above expected growth. So that is absolutely something we need to be celebrating as to what we're doing across the state. And again, a reminder about growth, it's comparing like kids to like kids, not about school districts or across the state, based on what you had for your score last year.
Jill,
Yeah.
question on that. Question on how they recalibrated for growth.
Mm-hmm.
If they were able to recalibrate the legacy exam in order to do growth, could they publish, not by kid, but even by school or by grade, what last year's results would have looked like in this year's? So, if they've recalibrated all this, to say, okay, it's, with the new test, the grades would have been, 2 years ago, grades would have, or scores would have been this in the new world, to show that, to your point about headlines and every, being down, and now, as Nancy presented last week, the expectation was 50% were going to be above and 50% below. Well, is there any way that they could show, well, we would have been a lot closer to 50-50 if we graded, or if the old test was like the new one? I just, to one extent we're saying, and everybody's saying, well, you can't compare the two. You can't look at the scores. You can't, it's 4 and 4, but you can't line them up. But yet they've gone through the exercise and they're saying, but we've recalibrated. And so these growth ones, you can trust the growth piece, but we can't get you anywhere else. Just wondering if there's a way to.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's certainly something that I can put out to ask. I find them to be very receptive to our questions, and for us to be able to educate everybody else, sort of, how do we go about looking at these. I know they were very clear about comparisons. I don't know at what point they said this is what we're going to do. This is the only thing that they've done as far as looking at old and being able to
Yeah.
compare. But I can certainly ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, it just, again, not so that they're mailing out to every
Yeah.
student, but just from a perspective of it, maybe they can just do it at the state level, statewide.
Yeah,
This is what,
it would have looked like if we could have.
Right.
Mhm.
right.
Joan, how many cycles of tests before you and Nancy and the administrators are in a position to make determinations with the new test where we're going in this growth, right? Because this year's a wash, because they tried, but you really can't compare it because it is not apples and apples. How many cycles, how many years? Is it 2, is it 3? Before you're more comfortable making comparisons from year to year under the same test?
I think with anything, it's an opportunity for the state to do their reflection too as to what they're seeing for trends across the state. But I think absolutely a couple of years would give us some validity as to what we're seeing as opposed to, a hit or a miss. So, I mean, I think definitely I would feel more comfortable. I can't speak for the other administrators, but, as we get into year 2 and year 3 of a cycle and we start to see a pattern, that's what I'd be looking at. I am comfortable with talking about last year's growth because the next slide is actually about comparing because they've told us that they've recalibrated, so a comparison for us to figure out the growth. They felt that the growth was comparable.
Okay.
So therefore, the next slide actually has to do with our ELA growth. So this is a comparison of where we were in 2016, which is the blue line, and where we are in 2017, which is the test that we just took.
So is this a comparison of the same students or the grade performance?
Grade.
Just
Okay.
the
Grade.
grade.
Yes. So this would have been the 4th graders in 2016 compared to the 4th graders in 2017.
Right.
So again, looking at sort of the growth, where we are with that, I think it's a question for us as to, what's going on, where are we, what are we looking at? And then the last sort of slide is our math. We have come to you for years talking about our math and what's happening, and you have, supported us in when we've asked for funding requests, and you've supported us when we look for our tiers program and how we can improve instruction. And I think, when we're looking at this, the growth between, in math for grades 6 and 7, where we were, where we are. Again, I think as we begin to share this with the staff and look at our reasons and our, what we've been doing, and is it paying off, and are we seeing students improving to where we want them to be? Again, just a measure.
Well, it's interesting because you look at those two. If I look at 2016 6th grade and 2017 7th grade, you see the growth significantly different. And it's the same story from 7th to 8th. So they had
A cohort of students had tremendous growth.
right,
Mm-hmm.
both of those.
Absolutely. So I kind of alluded sort of in my chatting with you about our next steps. Our next steps right now is that the administrations, we've been sharing data, we've been sharing it with the staff. It's going to be about doing that item analysis, looking at the specific questions. It's going to be looking at the strands. It's going to be looking at our practices, instructional practices within the classroom. It's going to be identifying those students that we're working with and really begin to look at how do we dive into this. I think it's a very exciting time. I think the fact is that it's an opportunity for us to have, we believe we've raised the bar here in Millis, that our students are doing remarkable things, and I actually see this next generation MCAS as being a nice fit with what Millis is about, and I think it's the match. We talk about instruction, we talk about assessment, and for me this is about an assessment finally matching closer to what we've been doing in our classroom. So
Mr. Chair, the only thing I would like to add is that as you, some of the questions, our STAR reading and STAR math assessments are aligned to MCAS, or the legacy MCAS they were aligned to. Maybe they'll need to do some recalibration there again with the new next generation MCAS. But it is predictive, so when we do our universal screening and students are at risk of not doing well, we do capture that at the beginning of the year in the STAR Math and STAR Reading. We communicate with parents around that and introduce, interventions, the tiers of student support. So there is, at least there used to be, a strong correlation between the STAR and the MCAS, and so we'll be looking at that to see if there is still a strong correlation.
And I think our belief system is still the same. The MCAS is not the be-all and end-all. It's a measure, and I think it's just a matter of it's a measure that, in my opinion, is a better match to what's going on in the classroom.
Last question. When we do the full presentation on the results, which will be after you guys analyze them, I'd be interested, I know you can't compare, but it'd be interesting to know, because it could create some anecdotal evidence one way or the other. For example, if we look at the legacy results and we take how students performed 2 years ago, and we can see their growth, and then kind of where that translated into the test they just took. So, for example, this seventh grade math, the 76%. Well, if they were all in needs improvement to proficient in legacy, we saw 76% growth, yet we're still sitting in the partially meeting. That would provide evidence that the test and the grading is more difficult than what it was. If we're seeing, but conversely, if we see they were in needs and proficient, and with that 76, they're all in meeting and exceeding, and it gives some kind of guideline. And also, even with the 5th and 6th grade, where the growths weren't as high, well, now, are we taking kids from needs improvement up to, or are they still sitting in the meeting expectations, but there was some growth there that we're looking at. At least it gives some idea of just how much of a difference it really.
We get individual growth scores for each student, so we could absolutely look at something along those lines as to doing some comparisons.
Will parents receive that on their parent report, the growth score?
I believe they will. We only got a snippet of what that continuum looks like. I have not seen yet the full report out of what a parent is going to get at home. So, but I'm guessing yes, because they don't typically calculate these and then not give the information out. So I suspect they will, but I think as we move forward and get more of those reports, we'll get a sense as to what that really looks like.
Mr. Chair, if I may just add, we have been operating with 3 to 5 year rolling averages, and I would say because we are so small, one student can be a 1% change, and we have different cohorts, grade levels of kids going through that have different profiles as a grade level. So we have the past rolling averages and the state past rolling averages as well. We haven't captured in our district report card last year, for example, as a benchmark to compare against. So it'll take us, I would predict, 3 years to level out and get what would be, again, the start of our 3-year rolling averages, so that we don't have the great variation just due to being such a small district. But we could compare current results to what was the the 5-year rolling average. The 5-year average at the state bumped up a point or two, not greatly, over the past few years.
And Nancy mentioned the STAR data. We actually have the data person at Clyde Brown actually doing some of that right now, to doing that correlation between what are our new MCAS 2017 scores compared to where students tested in September on STAR. So we're starting that dialogue and be able to look for some comparisons. Maureen Knowlton at the middle school a couple of years ago had done a correlation and found that STAR truly was a predictor of where students were. And if that's the case, we should be able to be prepared to remediate and or accelerate a student who is going to take that STAR.
Thanks, Sean.
Good?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jason?
Good evening, everybody.
How are you?
Waiting for my... So I'd like to present my school improvement plan for you. I know that you've received copies earlier. I also have included, I took the most recent data and have put together a report card. And maybe that might be the best place to start this evening. The format looks a little different this year. What I was hoping to show in our school report card for this year was the difference in the next generation MCAS CFB scores as compared to the state. I did use the same interpretive key and kind of looking at comparisons across the state. I think a couple of things stand out here that are noteworthy. There are some areas that we are extremely fortunate to be well above the state average. Grade 4 English language arts, mathematics in grades 3 and grade 4. Grade 3, and I should clarify, when we're looking at the numbers of students who met or exceeded the expectations, those are particularly strong for us. When we take a look at percentage of students exceeding state expectations by themselves, again, we're starting to see a pattern of above the state average, and in some cases, we're looking at well above the state average. So that, I think, is noteworthy. That's a good trend for us to pay attention to. There are a couple of areas that also appear on our report card as areas to pay attention to, focus on. Among them being in 2017, when we take a look at students meeting and exceeding expectations on the grade 3 MCAS for ELA, we were 2 points below. It's comparable, but we pride ourselves on working hard and helping our students to be as successful as they can academically. That's an area of focus, as is also in the grade 3 MCAS for ELA. When we talk about percentages of students meeting the expectations, we're 8 points below. We've already begun those conversations as a school. One of the interesting things I can tell you as we begin this journey is we've had informal conversations about where do we see the correlation between skills that we need to work on traced back down through the grade levels, and phonics is one of those particular areas. Teachers in first grade, second grade, third grade are all reporting those consistently. When we take a look at students who need additional support, that particular strand of literacy is consistently showing up for students who receive additional support in that area. So we are beginning a conversation about that. First and second grade have begun to really align more vertically the focus in phonics. They're putting strategies into place for all students using data. We're going to continue the conversation so that as the data tells us what it tells us, my impression is that phonics seems to be at the root of things. Once we get deeper into the analysis, we're going to uncover other things as well. But, at grade 4, it's really an end outcome-based assessment. So we want to be sure that all of our students are meeting or exceeding the expectations, and that really does begin at the very early grades with the standards vertically. It also opens up possibilities for us to have vertical conversations with the middle school as well. If we're able to trace specific strands all the way up through grades 6, 7, and 8, that's something that we can work with between schools to reinforce and bolster as well. I did include under other indicators of success information from the spring LEAP survey. LEAP is a professional organization that takes a look at districts who personalize learning. Of course, that's a huge focus here in Millis. And last year we conducted a survey with our grade 4 students to get their feelings and thoughts as they leave our building to move on to the middle school. What are their impressions of personal learning as they've experienced it? I think it's really interesting to take a look at when we talk about learner-focused experiences and personalization of learning. That's where learners report that they have relevant, contextualized work that's designed for their needs. 78% of our students scored high in moderate personalization or high personalization. That's very encouraging for me as a principal to know that students are reporting at a relatively young age that their perception is that their needs are being met. Another area that we asked in the survey was learner-led possibilities. Are students able to work with teachers to co-design their learning experiences in setting goals, in articulating their interests and strengths? That was one of our goals for last year, working on goal setting with students. And when we take a look at those outcomes, we're seeing that 64% of our students are reporting moderate and high levels of personalization. Perhaps the most compelling piece is one of the sections that asked about students' perceptions of teacher knowledge of their individual selves as learners, where teachers understand the strengths and interests and approaches in learning. And 86% of students reported that they felt really confident that their teachers knew them as learners. So again, this is kind of a new area for us to be looking at as an indicator of success, but I think it's an important one. I think that, fourth graders are able to tell us exactly what works for them and what doesn't work, and it's another piece of data that we can use as we take a look at improving programming at school. Are there any questions on the district report card, the school report card?
I don't have a question. It's more of a comment, just because, again, when you put out red, yellow, and green things, some people would focus on the red. But in this case, yes, it's red that they're under, but that 7 or 8% is sitting in the exceeded expectations. It's not that, and I mean, yeah, we're a little, it's, kind of break even on green, but it's not as if we're below in meeting expectations because our not meeting expectations is 8% higher than the district. That number is going to be about 2% higher. It's really that difference is really sitting in exceeded expectations. So it's just kind of, when you look at it and just go, oh, they're red. Yeah, obviously you'd like to have everybody above meeting expectations, but just looking at this group, it's not as if we've got the kids that were significantly higher in not meeting expectations.
Correct, and I think a couple of things contribute to that. Joan had mentioned earlier the recalibration of, the third grade did take the paper-based test last year, but it was the next generation MCAS, so I think that there was, as they reformulated the test, that's something that may contribute to it, as well as the individual cohort. When the fourth grade cohort of students, or who took it as last year as fourth graders, they were a much different cohort of learners than the third graders were. So when you take into account the individual aspects, I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Chair. I think that for us, it's something to think about and to really focus on as we provide those strategies for students to make them successful learners. We've already begun to identify those learners through our tiered systems of support, our intervention blocks. So students are already getting, based on our beginning of the year benchmark data, what they need to be successful. So in essence, it's kind of a starting point for us. They've pretty much hit the reset button, and we're looking at this data as a way to keep moving forward positively. I do tend to get lengthy in my presentation, so I promise to be as concise as possible because I know that I'm not alone this evening. So I'd like to begin first by quickly reviewing some of the areas of success from the school year plan from 16-17. Under instructional leadership, some of the successes that we had were providing extensive professional development in writing for teachers, empowering writers. Workshops were very successful. We also began to take vertically aligned looks at writing to foster that dialogue, and those were really eye-opening for teachers in many senses, and contributed to that vertical look at the work we need to do. We had expanded our project-based learning blocks for all students, and in some cases combined them with goal setting. That was a huge focus for us last year, that students, are reporting in other indicators that they felt success in. Team blocks were instituted with the idea of having data discussions, and those too were very beneficial. I spent a lot of time last year learning about Twitter and used every opportunity possible. One of the things that teachers actually loved was, as I do walkthroughs, to tweet and take pictures, and then I would actually send the pictures to the teachers and embed it with some feedback so they could digitally capture it in their the feedback, the evidence they collect for education evaluation. So it was kind of a win-win for everybody. Parents kind of got a glimpse into the classroom to see what was happening. Teachers got feedback, and I just enjoyed being there, Under the second indicator for management and operations, I did continue with the monthly building health walks. It's important to, can you not hear me?
Yeah, just click to the next slide.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. Again, given the reality of Clyde Brown, I feel it's important for me to be present, checking on the healthiness of the building, and that's comforting to people, I think, and it's informative to me. I kind of am able to identify problems early on and work to address them with John Engler, the Director of Facilities. So that was successful. There was really a huge focus on involving teachers in their own learning and leadership, encouraging them to share their strengths with staff, as well as coordinating intervention blocks so that we were making sure that all students had the opportunity to receive additional academic support if they needed it. Also, one of the things that I find most intriguing and proud of is the ability for us to take a look at what personalized learning looks like at the elementary level through our personalized learning lab classroom, which we have 11 third graders and 11 fourth graders who were learning the same curriculum but in different ways and styles. That, I think, is going to give us a lot of really good data about how to proceed forward as we think about the new school and in just making changes to our curriculum. Under family and community engagement, we did work hard as a district to develop new websites for each of our schools. I work with Jane Leota to keep our website developed and updated regularly with information. I spoke earlier about expanding Twitter. And I point out to people that on our website you can see the whole Twitter feed. Even if you're not on Twitter, you can actually follow the progress of what is happening, and people do appreciate that. The school council worked really hard to plan for the STEAM Maker Lab at Clyde Brown. We just met today. They've all signed on for another year. Really excited to move that forward. And I look forward to updating you later on in the year with the progress of that. The last indicator for an update would be professional culture. As I had mentioned earlier, staff really did work hard to showcase their own learning and share that with the school community. Collaboration, I think, was key in lots of different areas here, and it really created an atmosphere overall in our building that shared work and accomplishments together create stronger morale. So it was hard work, but it was good work, and we all felt really better about it at the end of the year. For this year, the goals focus areas really are on more students meeting and exceeding learning expectations. It's not all about MCAS, but I think that, as Joni pointed out earlier, this assessment really is a good one. If we're working to personalize learning for students and get them to think critically and problem solve, then this really is a match, so we want to pay attention to that. We're expanding our look holistically in education for all students through addressing social, emotional, behavioral needs. That's one of the goals I'll speak about shortly. We're looking also at ways to inform and include families in school programming as we move through the school year, and also to continue the work that we've done with teachers in their professional learning. So for academic programming this year, we really are focusing on further expanding the Tier 1 Plus in math and ELA. Teachers we had a conversation as a school community. Teachers are now redesigning their small group instructional blocks to have the opportunity to meet with students who need some support, students who need significant support, and students who need that academic challenge, all within the context of instructional blocks. And it's working. And teachers, it's hard to get used to, but teachers are really liking the fact that they now are able to do different kinds of things with different materials, with different groups of students. So we're beginning to, early stages on that, but we're beginning to find success. We are, as I had mentioned earlier, we're contributing to our opening of the STEAM lab by involving teachers in professional development. We've restructured our staff meetings so that every staff meeting forward is going to be a chance to literally play with apps, with devices, and the idea there being if we can get teachers to understand by working together how these materials and apps work, they in turn will be successful in helping students to come on board with them. And it's fun. And who doesn't like fun? We're also looking at expanding project-based learning to the classrooms. Last year it was more of a content-connected, pull out, let's go to the art room to do project-based learning, and now we're empowering teachers through this professional development and training to actually begin to do this work in their classrooms and invite some of the specialists in to help them with that. For social emotional behavioral learning, we have formed a district level committee that's looking at that. At Clyde Brown, we've formed our own building-based team to look at social emotional behavioral issues. We're really focusing more on connecting Open Circle, which is our curriculum, our social emotional curriculum, as a way to address those needs by identifying power standards at each grade level that really kind of focus developmentally on what kids need at different grade levels. I think it's no secret that children in kindergarten have different social emotional behavioral needs than fourth graders. So we're looking to, in essence, personalize it for them and provide training for staff in these topics as we look to reevaluate both Open Circle to make it the best it can be, and also to make improvements to our PBIS program. That's been in place for 7 years, believe it or not. Some things are working very well. Others we need to revise through the continuous improvement model. So those are some of the things that we're addressing for social emotional learning. Under assessment data, I had spoken earlier about further expanding our Tier 1 Plus focus area at each grade level and using data to really inform us of that, as well as the PD time devoted to teachers to analyze data and develop strategic plans. And my job would be to support the teachers through this team-driven process and also to provide one-to-one data support where it's needed as well. Under management and operations, I'm going to continue with those building health walks. They're important, and again, it's something we're going to continue to pay attention to. And working with the director of operations, we're looking to streamline a system so that if we do find things that need to be addressed, that it's instantaneous. We're able to resolve things as quickly as possible, so that things are addressed immediately. I'm looking to hire and support a new assistant principal at the Clyde Brown. The process has been underway thus far to expedite that process. And I just want to thank the committee for that support. I think that it's going to allow me more opportunity to get into the classrooms and do the work I need to do with learning with teachers. Also looking to promote active distributed leadership with teachers. They've risen to the challenge. They're loving it. They're very smart people who have great ideas, and it just makes sense to involve them in as many levels as possible in that process. And also to continue to look for best ways to enhance our interventions, our intervention blocks with support. For community and family engagement, this summer we began a Clyde Brown Facebook page, which I was a little nervous about, social media given what it is. I can honestly tell you that it has been very well received. People are extremely respectful of the fact that we're meaning it to be a bulletin board and to post information, and it's very effective. In addition to the website and our listservs, it's a way for us to reach other groups of families. We're looking this year to create 2 family surveys, one on the STEAM lab and Maker Lab impressions, and also general school culture. I think it's important for parents to be allowed to have an opportunity to weigh in. Their feedback's important, and we use that. We take it seriously, and we want to have people be as involved as possible in that process, as well as students. We're looking to, again, get their feedback. It's useful, it's valuable, and again, we use that information to make better informed programming decisions. Lastly, for professional culture, we're really liking the staff-led professional development. Boy, teachers do such a great job. I've always encouraged teachers as part of the evaluation process to find the area that you're the go-to person in. Whether it's, I create really great behavior management plans, I have really strong strategies for promoting phonics instruction, whatever that is, grow that, be that person on staff that people come to. And I think in that way, it really does empower teachers to assist one another in the work that we do. We're also looking to take field trips as professionals, professional learning communities, to the blended, the personalized learning lab classroom to really study elements of elementary blended learning. What works? What do we see as being really effective? What could we replicate at this grade level? What do we think is not replicable at this point? But just to open the conversation for further expansion. I'm also looking to support and guide teachers in data-driven solutions to problem solving through that collaboration. Again, it's so huge in the work we do, and we get the best results when we do things that way. And mostly, I'm looking to lead a joyful building for children, for families, for teachers, by listening, by being responsive to students, staff, and families, and just making Clyde Brown Elementary School the very best place it can be. Do you have any questions?
I have one, not so much a question, but I just wanted, in the community engagement in the surveys, or taking family surveys of STEAM Maker Lab and school culture, just wonder if you thought it might be a good idea to do a school culture one for the students.
That's a great idea.
And one to get the results of what the students actually consider the culture, but 2, to also potentially compare and contrast student perspective, parent perspective,
Right.
which may
That's a
not
great
always be
idea.
the same.
I know that last year we had a lot of success in really empowering students to take charge of their learning, and they did some really cool and creative things. And I was really impressed with how articulate they can be in communicating exactly what works and what doesn't work. So that's a wonderful suggestion. I think that it makes sense.
Mr. Chair, I'm assuming that those questions, so like for the MCAS, next generation, new generation MCAS, the questions that were asked of the students at the bottom here, I'm assuming these were asked in a very, first, second, third grade type of
Yes, they were
language.
kid-friendly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I didn't even understand. I was like,
Well,
what
it was
these
only
were.
grade 4, right?
It was
Right,
grade 4
it was
that
grade
took
4, and
yeah.
they were asked in kid-friendly kind of words, and
Yeah.
the same questionnaire would be worded in that.
Yeah. It really is all about the
What's
wording.
your professionalized learning experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, slightly different wording, right. Thank you.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Yeah, go ahead, Maureen. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hard time ejecting my disk, sorry. Oh, here we go.
That's more the Joan I know.
Wait.
I think we're okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
here we go. Yeah, go ahead.
So, good evening. I'm happy to be here tonight to share the middle school improvement plan with you. And I have to say I thought long and hard about this and what makes a good school. And if we already are a good school, which I think we are, how can we make it better for students? And I like to think we have a growth mindset as adults, and we've got a multitude of ways that we could improve. They're all in the school improvement plan. What I'm going to do tonight, so I don't stay here for 4 hours, is to highlight for you some of the things that I think we'll be focusing on. So you're well aware of the district vision and that our school improvement plan is aligned with the district plan. And we've been focused on personalized learning for the last 10 years or so, and we're continuing on that journey because change in education takes a long time. And there's always research that comes up that suggests additional change for better outcomes, but we want to be purposeful and thoughtful about the changes that we make. So our target areas over the last few years have been universal design for learning and providing more options for students to take away barriers, teaching to 21st century skills through blended learning and using technology, focusing on standards to plan and assess and report out student progress, and now shifting to students setting their own goals and taking ownership and agency so that it's not compliance with teachers' instructions all the time. So improving our school, I think, means making our curriculum and instruction stronger so we reach more students and we have increased achievement. It means taking a good hard look at our culture and our learning environment relative to today's world, not the world that I grew up in 100 years ago, and some of the challenges and social issues that are going on. It means building teacher collaboration and opportunities for networking and learning from one another. As I know when I was a teacher, my growth came from my interactions with my colleagues and my peers and observing them and sharing ideas. And so those 4 areas, I think I'm going to start in the middle because I think culture, if you don't have a strong culture, then no significant learning occurs. And if you build your culture, then research says that achievement will follow. So I think we need to make sure that our students feel connected and that they feel to our school and to the people in it. And how do we do that? So we do that through the messages we send to them every single day in classrooms, in the hallways, in the cafeteria, after school, before school. We try to provide opportunities for them to become involved, develop relationships with each other, with us, have a little fun, become a member of a group, a club, something that they can belong to, and to be recognized for the things that they do well. I, for one, am trying very hard to learn the names of all 420 plus students by the end of October and something about them so that I can address them in the hallways, because I think that makes a difference if you know students' names. Not sure I'm going to get there, but I'm trying. I think one of the ways that we build community in Millis is definitely through our sports, and we have a new middle school football team, the 2nd year this year, that's made a big difference. We're fortunate to have coaches and teams, opportunities that kids really want to be a part of, and it builds their pride in our school and some life skills and lessons along the way. We're also trying to really build leadership capacity amongst our students and send the message that they really do impact our culture, our climate, the atmosphere of our school. Mrs. Hickey took 4 students in September to WGBH to, it was called Online for Good Academy, and they listened to speakers and they worked with groups from 25 Massachusetts schools. And then we took a group of 30 students last week to Bridgewater to the Leadership Academy at the Mark Institute. And really the common thread between the 2 activities was to have the students take a long, hard look on their own without adults involved at our culture, at the challenges that we have, the challenges they face as kids today in middle school, what can we do about it, and to come up with an action plan. I'm not going to spoil it for you by telling you what that is. You'll have to wait. But I have high hopes that it's going to be something very awesome that they're planning that involves just building more community amongst our students in school. We also last year had, and I didn't write it here, but we had a student that we identified as an ambassador for Project 351, which is a community service event organization in Boston that takes 1 8th grader from every school in Massachusetts, every district, middle school. And they do a day of community service on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, and then they organize additional service projects throughout the year. It's a 1-year commitment. That student did a fabulous job, and we've just nominated our 2nd student today to continue that process this year. I would say one of the community building highlights the last couple of years was our Relay for Life, and that was a whole school event that brought all the kids together. There was lots of enthusiasm for that. We'd like to continue that, build on that, and hopefully develop more events like that that we can bring in community, parents, kids all together, fun events to build community. Continuing with culture, another focus, as Jason mentioned, was social-emotional learning. So where we're starting to help concentrate with students in the areas of self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, developing personal relationships, and social awareness. And I think in middle school those areas are pretty critical. Students that struggle in those areas can't focus on academics. So that's one of our focus areas, and that's all interwoven in our curriculum in conjunction with the DARE program. We do mark anti-bullying lessons by grade level still. We're talking about digital citizenship, and more importantly, like I showed in the leadership, how to use social media for positive gains, to build people up rather than to tear them down. We're very fortunate to have a full-time school resource officer this year. And I think that the impact he'll have is helping reminding them to make healthy decisions, fewer risky behaviors, simply by his presence in the hallway, being visible, and developing relationships with the kids and the Millis Police Department, and strengthening that bond. Something that we started last year and we implemented this year, and this came about through a survey of students and teachers, was developing common shared expectations in all parts of our building throughout the school day. You have a handout, I think, that's a little clearer to read. We felt like by spelling those out for children and reinforcing them across the school day, across all disciplines, by all faculty, we were holding them accountable and they are rising to the occasion. We developed a logo that we refer to all the time now, and we hope it's a foundation for future messages that we're sending to children, that we want them to accept themselves and others. We want them to respect themselves and others in their decisions that they make, and be an inspiration through their words and their actions to each other. So we're really pulling kids into improving what we do every day.
Mr. Chair, or if we go on, I love this. I think this is really good, and it's clear and concise, and it's a way to hold everyone accountable, right? But not necessarily for you, but could we do a variation of this for all of the schools? Like clearly the high school may have some crossover, and the Clyde Brown may have some, but I think this is such a great, and maybe it doesn't work in the elementary school, but I think it's a great way to, one page, this is what we expect of you, right? And it's not all negative, it's more just kind of, here's what you need to do. I really like that. I read them all, and
Yeah, the
as a
idea was
parent, I have no problem with any
to
of it.
state it in a positive way, what you were expected to do, not what not to do. I believe Clyde Brown has something similar through the PBIS program.
Yeah.
It's very simplified, take care of
Sure, no, that's right,
Yeah.
that's right.
But you do have on the playground some expansion of what that looks like for the playground and in the cafeteria. So you could gather those into a one-page thing as well. Yeah.
And I love the quote, do the right thing even when no one is looking. That's such a great life lesson to carry
That's
from.
what we try to tell them, even if the teacher's not watching or
That's right.
in common areas. And the kids contributed through surveys. We surveyed what qualities do you think we value in our school, and that's how we came up with accept, respect, and inspire. We kind of grouped them into categories. So one of the indicators for our culture and what's going on with students is our Metro West Health Survey. You have a summary of several results there in front of you. I think you have a sheet, a report card. But I pulled out a few that we were looking at in terms of identicators of student mental health. And we're kind of pleased to see a decline in bullying on school property, reports of cyberbullying, depressive symptoms. But we'll be looking more closely at all of the results of this. It's self-reported by students, so it's important to keep in mind, it was last fall, so it was the 7th and 8th graders from last year, not our current students. But we're looking at the answers that the 7th graders gave as an indicator. And so we'll be analyzing it to help us decide going forward this year what kinds of things we should focus on when we meet with student groups in huddles, when we talk to kids about social-emotional learning.
It's interesting.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. Going across, and obviously it's not formulaic, but I would have expected with school property bullying, cyberbullying, depressive symptoms, and feeling lonely all have gone down. That feel safe would have not gone down.
I would have too.
Well, we had a tough first day of school last.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago.
Was
Right.
it a year ago? No, was that 2 years ago?
I
Or
think
was
it's
that
Just 2 years ago.
that was 2015?
But they were students. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, they were in the school then, but it's hard to know how they're interpreting the questions
Yeah.
So,
or what they're feeling when they answer them.
and those are some good numbers up there, but one thing that does concern me a little bit is the violence section. Physical fighting for the past 12 months. We are
And so
20%.
that's inside and outside of school?
I was just gonna ask that.
Yeah, you should have
And then
clarified
carrying a
that.
weapon.
Also, that's outside of school and that's life, well,
Do
past
we-
30 days.
Do we have the ability, why wouldn't they ask that question in school and out of school? They were concerned about all the behaviors, but quite honestly, that's one where I
I
think
know
we
that
need
they
to delineate.
clarify and they talk about like a pocket knife would be considered a weapon, or something that would be like a club or a stick or something. So
But they don't delineate between what behavior is occurring in the school and then outside of the
not
school?
for this, I don't think. But we can look more closely.
Well, we may not have the answers. They may not be asking the question in the right way. We're concerned about that behavior regardless, but clearly if there's violence and weapon carrying, those stuff that's occurring in school is.
Mr. Chair, one of the things, there are probably, over 100 questions and categories that we get the data on, ranging from, do kids wear bicycle helmets? Do they drive have they ever driven with a drunk adult? Do they watch how much TV? It's a huge array of questions, and so in our discussions that we're having, and the PLC groups of teachers are discussing this, we're thinking that one of the most powerful ways we can address this is to increase the preventative factors and the resilience, because whether it's risky behavior like cigarettes or alcohol or carrying a weapon or, all kinds of risky behaviors that kids can participate in, if we strengthen the preventative aspects and do a strengths-based approach, which Ms. Knowlton is talking about in the increasing the connection to the school and feeling like you're a member of the community and you're in a club, and all of those strengths-based approaches, that might be the best way we can approach it, rather than targeting each small behavior. But it's in discussion, so I just thought I'd mention that.
One last question just on the results. Our bullying on school property is, over the last 8 years, is almost in half of what it was, which is phenomenal. We're still a little bit above what the Metro West average is. Do we know if the Metro West average has dropped as dramatically as that, or if we've...
I think it has.
We can look. And look
Yeah.
over
It would just
time.
be interesting to know how the Metro West and how our downward trajectory is faster or on par with what's going on elsewhere.
It's also when the new law came out, and I'm not saying we're not doing good things here, but there may be a more normalization of what is bullying, and we're 8 years, right?
Yep.
So we don't even know if those numbers truly reflect what would be considered true bullying in perception. So we may be in a better place, and I know because of the culture, but it also could be, it's now a concept that's been around for a while.
To that end, it could go the other way, though, because now it is a much more widely used,
Yes.
much more
That's right.
widely identified, I'll put that in quotes, my point being, what would have been reported or considered bullying 8 years ago, prior to the law, prior to the focus, probably some of it wouldn't have been reported 8 years ago with what they would have been reporting or considering bullying today.
That's a fair point.
So it could definitely go both ways.
So simultaneously with building culture, with a strong culture that supports well-being, we focus on improving student achievement as well. And the tiered system of support over the past few years has focused on reading and math support. And now one way that we're going to strengthen it is to build in the social, emotional, behavioral support through that tiered model as well. Also, we'd like to build in more opportunities for enrichment and acceleration for kids who are ready for it. So if I give you a pretest on information and you already know all the answers, what do we do now? So that you don't have to sit through the same instruction. And that all falls in line with personalization and developing some personal learning paths. Last year we audited what we already do in the classroom to embed social emotional learning, and now we're looking at specific other strategies that we can incorporate to build that up and make it stronger. We're still using power standards from the Mass frameworks to guide lesson planning, and especially in grades 5 and grade 6 with standards-based report cards, the teachers are aligning their assessments closely to the standards that are being measured and taught. We're developing those standards and proficiency scales in grade 7 this year. Those are under construction. And we're trying to measure and report out more accurately what students are actually learning, what skills and competencies they've gained and mastered. Teachers continue to revise their curriculum around the standards, around what we're learning about personalized learning, to improve what they do every single day. And finally, we'll be examining this year our schedule, our middle school schedule, to see if there's a better way for doing things. We're a little bit constrained by sharing buildings, sharing staff. Some of the concepts of personalized learning and project-based learning sometimes don't work with a 49-minute block of time. So we're just going to start to explore that and see if we can't come up with something that might be a little more conducive to moving us forward. In terms of standards-based report cards, the teachers have identified power standards, as Jason explained before, and they're now really aligning their assessments to the standards. And it's important to know that the assessment might not be a test at the end of a unit, that kids have multiple opportunities to show that they've mastered a standard. It could be, if they like to write, they might be doing an essay or writing a news article. If they like to be creative and do something with their hands, they might build something or do an art project or create something that way. The proficiency scales are being developed by teachers, and they look at a standard and they identify specifically what they will accept from a student as demonstration of mastery for that standard. And that's how they decide if a student earns a 3 or a 2 or a 4 or a 1 on their rating scale for an assignment or an assessment. And it's been a really good exercise for teachers to really think about how do they evaluate mastery and what does mastery really look like. And that's something that we're going to share out with parents in the future as we kind of solidify that for ourselves. Also, part of that is learner expectations. So what we've done is we've taken things like effort and behavior and timeliness of turning in assignments and collaboration, working with others, and taking them out of the grading process. So you sort of have two different ways to look at your student. You have specific mastery of specific skills and competencies through the rating scale of 1 through 4, and then you have learner expectations that are built around 21st century skills, around social emotional learning standards, around self-regulation. I gave you a copy of 2 handouts that we did for open house this year, one for 5th grade and one for 6th. And those learner expectations are delineated on there. 5th grade are a little different. 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers got together over the summer and really collaborated to develop expectations that they thought were important for success. And then, of course, the teacher comments on the report cards sort of round out that picture of that student, because the observations that they make in the classroom of how the student looks is important too. So we feel like the standards-based report cards kind of give 3 different pieces that together give you a good rounded picture of how that student's doing. We know that it's a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift for teachers, for students, and for parents. I think the students are there. I think the students understand because the teachers are doing a better job of saying, this is what I expect you to learn. This is the skill we're working on. This is the competency that I want you to master. And this is how you're going to show me. So they have a really clear path as to where they need to go. And they know that a 3 is what they're shooting for. If they've earned a 3, they've mastered, they've learned what they need to learn at that grade level. But then we talk to them about what does it look like to go deeper and to apply what you've learned for a 4. We know that as adults, even teachers, still sometimes a 3 is not a B. And it's really hard for us to get past that we can't. It's kind of like the MCAS with the apples and oranges. The standards-based rating scale is not equivalent to an A, B, C, or D. It's a different way of looking at grading. So we would like to do more outreach with parents, more explanations, more discussions, more whether it's having small groups come in and talk to us about it, whether it's creating a video to explain it a little better. We're talking about ways that we could clarify that so that everybody feels more comfortable with it, and we can sort of move forward with that. Questions about?
I guess, not so much a question, but a comment, I guess, as we continue to roll out the standards-based report cards and as we look to expand to different grades, and if we get into the high school, I think personally, just anecdotally, I think one of the conversations that might help with parents is how does this translate outside of this building?
Mm-hmm.
How do the results translate outside of the building? It's all well and good that we understand what it means in here, but, and again, this has less to do with middle school, but then high school perspective. At the end of the day, people outside of this building and community need to also be able to understand it if they're going to measure students for college, jobs, etc. So how do we communicate that understanding and meaning, and understand that there's going to be an acceptance of that, so that unless every school goes to this model, that, you know, how does the 3 translate to the 89 or the 92 that every other student is being looked at? I think that's, if we can figure out how to explain that, connect that, or explain that you don't have to worry about that because, you know, this is not going to be an apples and oranges comparison when they leave Millis. That would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chair. So we talked a little bit about this last week, just the standard-based report cards. 3 doesn't mean a B, but it's hard to understand what it does mean. My son, if he's at a 3, does that mean, it means he's doing well. It's what's expected of him, but there's more color. It feels like there's just more that's needed. And the grades used to, maybe it's just because we understood it's the world we came from. I'm not sure, but I feel like when the math homework comes home and it's in a binder and you flip through it and there's some 3s and there's a 2, well, was that 2 graded just at the beginning, that the concept was just introduced? Is it something that was tested at the end of the learning cycle and he's still a 2? And a 10-minute parent-teacher conference, it just, sometimes there's a disconnect. It's hard to know how they're doing because it's such a different way of thinking. So if 3 is not a B, I don't know, I'm a data person. I don't know what it means if it doesn't translate to something.
I think standards-based grading, and Joan, feel free to pipe in, it came about because of just inconsistency in grading in general. If the 3 of you teach the same subject and give assignments, you might look at an assignment and say, oh, this is A work, but you might say, no, it's B work, or I'm going to take 5 points off because it's late, but I'm not. There were just inconsistencies. So what does an A really mean in Millis compared to an A in 3 other towns? Because there was just subjectivity in it. So I think what this tries to do is bring in some objective look at really what have students learned? What do we want them to learn at this grade level? Did they learn it? Did they master it? Did they demonstrate it? And we try to take away that idea of averaging. Right, so I might have gotten a 60 at the beginning of the term, and then I get a 90, but then I get a 50. And does that really tell me anything about what I've learned either?
Right.
And what really was that test measuring? So now we're trying to be very specific about what kinds of questions are on tests, what proficiency level scales or proficiency levels they measure. And I would say I don't have the data as to how many schools in Massachusetts are doing standards-based grading or competency-based grading, but there are states that have gone in that direction as a state-wide mandate. There are colleges that accept competency-based report cards that don't have traditional GPAs. Sometimes there's some kind of statistical conversion between competency-based and GPA, and I don't know, I'm not mathematical in that way either. But I think as educators we have the benefit of reading the research and knowing what other schools are doing. I'm in a cohort of about 15 other middle school principals, and every single school is talking about standards-based report cards in some fashion.
And I can tell you that every single parent I talk to is equally as confused and has no idea what it means. So, what a 3 means or what a 2 means.
Mm-hmm.
But
so we need to do a better job.
Or maybe just we need to understand.
As a middle school parent, I can say that my daughter in 7th grade gets traditional grades. I don't have any better sense of what she's actually learning than you do probably, but it's comfortable and familiar to see those averages in the grade book. So I think what happens is because the terminology is new and you're seeing a 3 instead of an 85 or a 90 or something, it makes us ask questions, whereas in the old form of grading really didn't capture what was being learned, and I don't have any better sense with my daughter what she's actually mastered and whether, so it's we always encourage people when they're in that situation to contact the teacher and just ask the questions, and it's really truly only the classroom teacher can let you know, give you the answers to the questions you have.
Right.
I think one of the things that we all struggle with as educators is what do we want our kids to know and be able to do? And the bigger question is how will they show us they know it? And I think one of the things in my more years than I'd like to admit to years in education is that there had never been a conversation about what are the most important things. And when I first arrived here in Millis had done so much work already on power standards. Our question was that these were the most important things that we think at a grade level, that we think in a class, that we want our kids to walk away and know. There's other stuff that they have to know too, but those are the most important. And the question and the proficiency scales and the conversation really get around the idea of, do our assessments match what we think is the most important things that they need to be able to do, and are they doing it? And I think we do. We get caught up in our own lives. I was an A student, I was a B student, I know what that means. But the reality is with averages, as Maureen's example, you can be high one day and low the next day, but you don't know what the test was even testing. So what do you actually know in mathematics or in social studies or whatever? So those are some of the things. In younger grades, it's a little easier. We see a smiley face on a paper, or we see a star, or we see check marks or whatever. We don't have grades on those, but we have some sense as to how the teacher corrected them as to whether or not they were getting the concept. And I think that's the piece that we're looking at. What is the demonstration of competency in that area that a student's able to do? And then what do we have to do to educate the people who are looking at it so that they understand it the same way? If I'm going to go jump out of a plane in a parachute, the guy who's been great in unpacking my parachute, I don't want him to have an average of an A. I want him to know that he knows how to fold the lines, he knows how to fold the cords work 100%. He's proven competence in that. I don't want the average. Like some days he gets it, some days he doesn't get it, whatever, and I'm going to jump out of a plane with that folded parachute.
Right.
So I think those are what we're trying to get at, not to create stress, but to really show a competency in what they know. And the state of Rhode Island is one that actually has gone to, for the most part, all schools through high school as a standards-based approach. And they had a big forum where they had all of the colleges and said, how do we translate this to you? I was not present, so this is absolutely people talking about it. But the answer was, the colleges said, we'll take whatever you get and you give us and we'll figure it out. So they're not worried about saying, what's your GPA or what does this look like? So I think one of the things, it's a conversation and we've never had it before. So if nothing else, the conversation is a good one to have to say, what do we want kids to know and be able to do? One of the key things for MCAS is for kids to be college and career life ready. Those are the things we're assessing with MCAS. I think that's what we're looking at as well, as to how does all this other stuff support that as we move forward.
As a middle school parent who saw the standard-based report card yesterday, actually, no, it wasn't standard-based, it was the grades, but the teacher comments are important. And I know that their work, and I get that there's a lot of work to go into the report card, and that the teacher comments may feel like, oh, there's more work to do, but they were meaningful, and it helped me because I'm focused on the academics, but I'm also focused on behavior as the father of a 7th grade boy, and I want to make sure that he's doing the right thing in the classroom. So they're appreciated, and they're read, and they're looked at. So I think that's something you can bring back to your teachers. That those I understand their work, but they're very helpful.
And I think especially with the standards-based, the comments will be important, and the teachers have talked about putting more comments on. The other issue is Power School, and we know that it looks different, the view for 5th and 6th graders. So we are working on that too at the back end to try and figure out a way to give more information through that system.
I'd say the comments are critical, and especially at the end of the year, if your child has gone from a 4 to a 3 or a 3 to a 2, if there's no comment, you're at the end of the year, the teachers are gone for the year. It's just so important to understand. And it could be maybe whatever was being taught changed, they learned something new, and but we compare, that's just what people do, right?
So what I would say is, it's kind of like when you go to take your driver's test. Once you master it, you mastered it. You get your license. And it's not tomorrow, if you make a mistake, they take it away and you're now down to a 2. So mastery, once a student's demonstrated mastery of the standard, to the teacher's satisfaction over time, then it shouldn't necessarily go down. There may be multiple assignments that assess that standard, when they're learning it, and they might demonstrate it one day, not the next, but as soon as the teacher's confident that that student has demonstrated it over time, you mastered it. So you wouldn't expect that.
They do.
But right now, what you're seeing, is sort of an average that's updated every time they do something that's addressing that statement. And we need to do more education with parents on that. More aware of that.
Can I ask just one last question more on the evaluation piece? And it's because you brought up kind of how do you get rid of the subjective nature, A versus B, multiple teachers. How consistent or to what extent are there, I guess I'll call it, auditable evaluations of a 3 versus a 4? I mean, A's and B's are a little bit the same concept, but when you're talking about numeric grades, well, here's a test. I had 100 questions and I got 80 of them right. You got an 80. A and B, it's more subjective because what does the teacher interpret as, what were they looking for and what are they, how does that, if part of the standards based, and I'm asking this more as, again, it's a question we should probably address collectively as we're explaining this, how does teacher A and teacher B evaluate the same set of standards? The standards are the same, but I can't imagine we're completely eliminating subjectivity from teacher A and teacher B and how they read it. So I just, to say that we're getting rid of objectivity, I don't know.
Right, so if you got 85% of the questions right on a test, it's a percentage that falls
Right,
in
and
the
you could
range
take
of
the
a B.
test and
Right,
you can
yeah.
say, look, here's the test and here's the 85% they got right.
But on this, it's the proficiency scales, which parents haven't seen to this point, where the teachers take every standard that's on the report card, every power standard, and break it down into what will I accept for mastery at a 3, what will that look like, what will the student have to do and be able to demonstrate, and then what's a 2, what's a 1, and then what's a 4. And a 4 typically is the same standard, but being able to apply it at a deeper level. So a test might have a range of questions on it. Some of the questions might be show that the student's performing at mastery level of 2, and then the other questions might require a little deeper thinking, so that would be show mastery, and then others might be questions that they have to really analyze and interpret and go deeper and show that they can apply what they've learned.
But you're still taking an average of all of the scores within that.
No, in the end on the report card, if you've mastered it, if you've earned a 3,
I think that's the part
you
I'm
get
having
3.
a hard time. So once you hit a 3, you can never be a 2?
For a particular standard, if they've demonstrated it, then we
But don't you
can
introduce
safely say they
new
mastered it.
standards, not standards, new concepts throughout the year? So if you have English and you're teaching one concept and you master that, but then the next concept the student has a hard time. So they may be a 2 on that concept.
In that
So-
different concept, right?
Sure.
So we don't give one overall rating at the end of the year. It'll be in each standard that's assessed.
Okay, so that's where you're losing me.
Well, the part of the hard part is a standard has many sub-skills to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But at the end of the year, we'll have,
Right.
the students will have an ELA score, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, and a math. No?
No.
No.
15 ELA scores based on the 15 standards that were taught within ELA.
Okay.
It's no longer like getting the A for math for the year. You're going to have in math can, count by 2s, can tell time to 5-minute intervals, can add and subtract. And so for every one of those standards, they will get a grade. Now, as Maureen said, once you attain that grade, the teacher's not teaching that again. So if you can tell time to 5-minute intervals, you got it. You're done. So you're not getting that clock to 5-minute intervals again. We might get clocks to 1-minute intervals, but that might be a different standard.
Okay.
So you're not getting an English grade or a math grade or a science grade or a social studies grade. You're getting for as many standards, power standards that have been determined by that subject area in that grade level. You're getting one for each.
Okay.
And you're absolutely right. In some cases, like language arts, where it's about writing, you're going to grade them on writing a narrative essay. The expectations from that teacher in September will be very different as a writer in April or May. But if you think of it as the science or the social studies, they're doing a unit of study and they're teaching the water cycle. That's done in September, October, November. They're not going back to the water cycle because they'll never get to everything else
Sure.
they're teaching.
But what if that student struggles with the water cycle and ends up with a 1 or a 2?
Yeah. So
Then how do we address that?
A couple of things. It'll be addressed in the comment section. It can be remediated as a one-to-one with the teacher and the
Okay.
student. But that whole class is not gonna go back and revisit the water cycle.
Understood. Yep.
Because one or two still haven't grasped the concept. Our goal is to get all kids to be threes. That's the grade level concept that we want taught. But it's just an idea of which is the small group instructions that might be a tiered system of support and how we address that versus what's the whole class instructing on. Did that help?
No,
you,
that helped a lot, and I think that these conversations are good. And if we're having a hard time and we listen and we hear it from, this isn't the first time we've heard this concept, I can imagine what the parents that don't have this level of exposure are feeling. So how do we get that
Right.
word out there? What's the best way? Because I'll tell you, parent-teacher conferences are probably going to be 9 minutes of, can you explain to me what this 3 means? And then a minute of everything else.
I think Maureen and I and Jason actually, we've struggled with how to get the message out. Each year we've done open forums, we've had coffees or whatever. So for us, it's about, we know we need to increase this. We're struggling with,
Put it on your Facebook page.
we're struggling with that.
They'll read that.
Maybe a video.
A clip or
Yeah,
something
I'm
like that.
talking about that.
So not to, and we'll get back and I'll try and keep us on. But in the example of the water cycle, so no, so they get the 1 and 2 in September. If there's remediation, is there a point? So, say they do extra work later in the year.
Yes.
Yes.
Will the 2 change to a 3, like in the one spot, or will it be like, okay, first quarter they were a 2, second quarter they got a 3. Everybody else who had a 3 may not have a second quarter grade in that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The quote for me is always, every kid learns, but not in the same way on the same day. And so for me, that's the piece. It's yes, every student, we will work with the students to get to that point, and it may be that only one student gets a grade in third term on the water cycle, which was taught in term 1. But at what
Gotcha.
point did he get to demonstrate that he understands the whole idea
Yep.
of water?
That's helpful.
Makes sense.
But when we get to 9th grade, we go back to grades.
That's
So
a
we just
district
hope we don't
decision.
lose them along the
I will just say in comments I've had with teachers this year, they really like it from a teacher perspective because they'll maybe give an assessment or ask kids to do a project or whatever to demonstrate what they know. And then when they go back and look at their class and how everybody's ratings were, and they say to themselves, I need to go back and revisit this because a percentage of students, I rated them as a 2. So that tells me they didn't quite master it, so I need to do re-instruction in that area, specific on a specific skill. So from a teacher perspective, rather than, oh, everybody got B's, but what questions did they miss?
And I
Right?
think
Or everybody got a C on the test, but now I have to look and find out what questions did they all miss, what do I have to revisit? So now they have it gives them a good sense of, that cycle of instruction, looking at data, re-instruction, reassessing, that they kind of go through.
And just one last comment, I would say rubrics are a huge part of standards-based assessment because, for example, an essay, and you can imagine the variability of 6 of us getting the same essay and giving it a different grade, even if we knew we were wanting to assess grammar, spelling, capitalization, and topic development or something, if we had those parameters. So what a rubric does and what we do with teachers periodically is do the, given the rubric, and the state had given us the MCAS essay rubric years ago, so that was a common one, but teachers use other rubrics. Given a stack of papers, how would we as a grade level team, or say 3rd grade teachers or 4th grade teachers, how would we assess an essay given this rubric? And there is the calibration and the discussion, and that's actually what they do at the state level too, of saying, no, I would say, I think it's a 3, and Steve might say, no, I think it's 4, and we'd then as teachers talk about why and use evidence of why we think that. And so there is good discussion and calibration among teachers so that there is consistency in and less subjectivity.
So this is very loaded and it's not directed, it's probably more for Joan and Nancy. So what do we need to address? Is it getting teachers on the same page and some consistency across subject matters or grades? Because if what we're getting as parents is confusing to us, and it sounds like some of this is based more on getting teachers and administrators on the same page, no? Because I don't care how the sausage is made, I just want to get the same
You just want to know.
piece, sorry for the analogy, but I just want to get that. It doesn't matter how it's made, because, and maybe it's just we're old school and we're used to grades and we're used to, some tangible way to look at it. I like this idea because I think it makes for better classroom experience and teaching and personalized learning, but I don't necessarily have to see that if the classroom learning and the teaching is improving and I can get my A, B's, C's, and D's. Do we need this?
Do we need this?
I'm sorry, it's a very,
Yeah.
I mean, do we need this? So what are we hoping to accomplish? Because clearly maybe it's just we haven't been educated enough, maybe we haven't been paying attention enough, but there's confusion on our part.
I'm sorry. One of the things that comes to mind is our trying to change the mindset of students too, and how kids have been historically focused on grades. And can I have one more point so I can get an A? Am I an A student, or I'm not smart? I'm not smart because all of you are getting A's and I'm only getting C's. I'm not smart. And what do I have to do to get an A? How much do I have to write to get an A? How long does my project have to be to get an A? That kind of thing. And so I think part of this whole movement is to shift away from just working for a grade, and to be able to say I'm an A student, and to shift towards what is it that you are actually learning, and get excited about learning something new, and seeing your own personal growth rather than comparing your performance to somebody else's. There's still a little bit of, I got a 3, what did you get? But it's more about how much I've learned as my own personal self and how much I'm growing. And I think we're trying to get student mindsets to that point too.
I think
There's
it's
a lot
case too
to
of the
it.
proficiency scale, Steve. I think it's a case of defining what is a 3. And then if you're not there yet, you're a 2. So, example I used before, and again, I don't want to sort of perseverate on this, but the example of telling time to 5-minute intervals. If that is a second grade standard, that you will be able to read a clock to 5-minute intervals, the kid who can only read to the half an hour and the hour isn't there yet, because he can only do 30 minutes and the whole hour. So we're working towards getting him to 5-minute intervals, which would be the 3, that's the grade level expectation. He's at a 2. But the kid who can turn around and tell you to the 1 minute, he can talk about time zones, he can talk about doing it on the 24-hour clock as opposed to the 12-hour clock. So that's the 4. So all of those conversations, I think it gets a little bit to what Mark was talking about, those are the conversations that the teachers are having. What is the standard for, what does the state framework say every kid should know at a grade level? That becomes your standard. Can you demonstrate that? If you're not there yet and you need some remediation and or some more time, you're below that, you're a 2. But if you're above and beyond it, you're a 4. And I think all of this is key. The preparation that we worked with the teachers for a whole year, having the dialogue around proficiency scales. At Clyde Brown, it was getting 5 people to consensus who all taught 4th grade. At the middle school, occasionally it's 2 people, but often it's 1. It's about what does the state require as the standard? What's slightly below that, and what's above that.
But I'm not arguing the standards and calibration. I think that's important. It's helpful, but my question still stands as what are the
What's
parents
the
getting?
benefit?
I can
I'm not
provide you
questioning
an
the benefit,
example.
because
Okay.
I think there truly is a benefit
Yeah.
to teachers and consistency across, if you have 3 or 4 teachers. The question is, what is the product we as parents are getting? And I'm not questioning the need for any of what you said, and I wasn't being flippant when I said, this is more behind the scenes, right? And this is great to work together, but what, as a parent, I can see where even through education, this will become confusing.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
can I just give an example? So a test came home, test came home yesterday that I had to sign. So I flipped through it, lots of little red checks. It's nice red checks, that's good, I get that. I see like E1, E2, E3 at the top of things. At the back, I've got E1, E2, E3, and it shows me 3, 3, 3, 2. I'm like, okay, 3s, he's getting, I don't know what the expectation is for this test. I have to sign it. I have no idea what he was supposed to understand conceptually to achieve the 3. I have no idea what the standards were. But on one of the things where he had a 3, one of the questions he got wrong, and he still got a 3, was, the answer was, as he's working out his math, 300 plus 3 equals 3,003. So it must be that he answered some of the questions okay, so he's understanding the concept, so he got the 3. But clearly there's something missing there with his attention to detail. And so if there's a 3 for that section, how is that ever identified?
I would have to know what the particular standard, I would say go to the teacher.
Well, I will, and I
You
have
know,
a parent teacher
Yeah,
this
so
week.
I know that
but
they
that's an
put those
example of the
codes
confusion
on
as
and
a
they give you a
parent.
list of what those codes match up to in the standards. And if you matched them up, you'd be able to see what exactly they were supposed to demonstrate on that assessment.
But that's an example of, as a
But-
parent, I'm looking through this, I'm signing it, I don't know what I'm identifying, but I guess I saw it. But I don't know if I'm seeing it because it's a problem. I don't see it if
This
I'm
is good
signing it because
feedback
it's
that
good.
I can take back.
I don't know
and
what the
we can work
standards
with.
mean. I don't know what was expected from that test. And the 2 that he got, he had more questions right. So that's where I'm just, I don't know what it means.
Your
Sorry.
point's well taken. And I'll take it back. Yeah. To be continued,
Yeah.
definitely.
We're all
No,
learning.
I think,
It's on our radar,
but I think
please know that.
I do think and unfortunately, we've spent a ton of time on it, and obviously, collectively, we haven't dived into it, and probably because some of us are now just starting to get these and trying to interpret them. But I do think we probably should maybe bring one back again and go through it, because I think there's, more questions and more dialogue, and if we can figure out how to frame communications that you guys can send out, or that we can help you understand where, you guys have been doing this for years. You know where you want it to be. And I do think out of this, to Steve's point, there is an element of this that has come out of this dialogue, which is, it sounds like there's kind of a core thing of getting away from 98 versus 95 versus 85, A versus B versus C. And at the end of the day, that's the biggest question of why do we need to get away from A versus B versus C? Because other than you guys who are in this and doing this, and it's your profession, anybody out there has no idea and really getting, why can't we have a valedictorian who gets a 98? If everybody's going to be a 3, and maybe it's truly a mindset shift that we have to help figure out how to get out there. But that's really where it is. And we've got all standards, so we've aligned everybody. We've got everybody. But why can't we keep our A, B, C, D, and F? So I think hopefully this has been, I know we've spent a lot of time on it tonight, but without hijacking the rest of the presentation.
I'll go really quick. So along with that, we do want to focus on enrichment and acceleration of students who are ready to move at a little bit of a quicker pace through real-world applications, and we're looking at how does technology help us support that, things like Genius Hour and project-based learning and extensions of the curriculum. So that's on our radar as well. And how will we do that? Well, we think we need to do a little bit more analysis of student work samples during the year in PLCs. More interdisciplinary lessons and units and projects. There's great overlap between math and science, ELA, and all of the areas to support reading and writing. And our teachers did some of that last year and are working on doing that this year. Grade 7 in particular, and I'm not sure that contributed to the math, but 7th grade science worked a lot of math into the curriculum last year. Just some highlights that went sort of above and beyond. We had a 5th grader from Mrs. Hodges' class who won first place in a contest by Eversource. She wrote a song lyrics about how to save energy. She was invited to a dinner and a big presentation and got an award and everything else, so she was very proud. And 2 of our students participated at the state level in the science fair in 7th grade. So we're trying to look for opportunities outside of school for kids to, to kind of take it to the next level. As always, our decisions are based on data, and MCAS is one piece of data. Joan explained a lot, so I'll give you kind of just quick highlights of middle school. When we looked at our ELA scores in the top 2 categories, and you'll notice that they're using sort of standards-based language here, meets expectations and exceeds expectations. We were above the state average in grade 6 and grade 7. As a school, we had 48% meeting or exceeding standards, which was just 1% below the state average. And if that's our baseline this year, because we can't really compare to previous years, then we'd like to see an increase of about 5% next year, if we can compare our scores to next year. Our student growth, as Joan explained, was within that target range of 40 to 60% in grades 6, 7, and 8. 7th grade showed pretty strong growth in ELA. I had the same question that you did about comparing student growth percentiles, if they can compute them. I wasn't quite sure if there was a way to go back and compare, but as far as we know, there isn't at this moment, and they're telling us not to do that, so we're trying really hard not to do that, and to take the scores for what they are, and to just look at our comparison to the state at this point, because we always like to compare ourselves to someone else to see how we're doing, right? In math, some things to keep in mind, sorry, for the ELA was that our 8th grade took it on an iPad. So we're not quite sure what impact taking ELA on a device had on those students. We know that when they were typing essays and all, it was hard. On a paper test, you get pages and pages that are blank to write in, and they try to fill them up. On a computer screen, it's a short little box that continues to roll, and we don't know when we looked at their responses, because now we can get a printout of all the open responses and read them. A lot of them were quite short, so we're not sure if that had something to do with, taking it on a device, flipping back and forth from a reading passage to an open response, and having to go back and look for information and highlight and then flip back the screen. There's a lot of just questions we have, and I don't know.
Were they short and good, or were they?
Some.
No, like were they?
So what
they're filling up. You can fill up 4 pages of
right.
nothing
No, I
or write.
agree. I agree. What they look for is
font.
text evidence and support from passages, and maybe there wasn't as much. Again, I don't know. We just got this data a week or so ago, so we're
But that
still
may
starting to
be
look
just a logistical issue. Are we letting the kids do anything during the year just to get used to that?
Oh, and the 8th grade
that
are,
would
because
throw me for a loop.
Right.
they have their iPads every single day in 8th grade,
Okay,
so
so-
we didn't really think whether it was the format of the test or the questions or what. And our 5th grade ELA test was 3 sessions last year as opposed to 2 in the past. 2 shorter and 1 longer, and we administered it over 3 days. So one of our questions was, how did they do on the 3rd day? Did it, because we spread it out over time and it was 3 sessions, did that make any difference? I don't know. I don't have any answers. But we're going to do as much analysis as we possibly can of that. So on math, overall 55% of our students as a school were meeting or exceeding expectations, and that was 7% above the state. So like Joan said, we were pretty happy with our math scores this year. We, if that's our baseline, we're hoping maybe to be 10% above the state next year if we can use that as a comparison. Our scores in the top 2 categories, meeting and exceeding, were all above the state averages, with some really nice achievement levels in 7th grade and 8th grade. And then our growth, like Joan said, especially in 7th and 8th grade, 40 to 60% is the range that we like to see at a minimum, and we had 75 and 79.5% growth at those levels. So our 8th grade did take the math on the iPad too, so obviously it seems that wasn't an issue, the device wasn't an issue for math, so we're looking at that. As Jason mentioned, one of the tools that we're using to collect some data around personalized learning is the LEAP Innovation Survey. So we did it as a school also. We did it 2 years ago and last year. And this would be one example of a question that would be on there. I set my goals for learning on my own, and then you get some cumulative data. So this was school data for 400 and something students that answered that question. And it's why it ties into one of our goals for the year to have students set their own learning goals and take more ownership and more agency. So this gives us sort of a baseline of where were we last year in terms of how students self-reported, whether they set goals or not. So another focus is to continue to try and reach as many people as we can in as many ways as we can, using all the possible means that we have available to us to share what's happening, to get information out. I followed Jason's lead last week and started a middle school Facebook page. There were, I think, over 100 people following in less than a week, so I think that was, like, as you said, Jason, probably a good way to get some information out.
It's great, seriously, it's great.
We continue with newsletters and brochures and website and listserv posts and things like that too. This is the 2nd year that we've done conferences at the middle school. We're still trying to figure out the best way to make those be effective. When teachers are seeing 100+ students, it's quite a challenge to try and accommodate every single parent. And there was an overwhelming demand in grade 5 and grade 6 for parent conferences, and the teachers have met with, I would say, about a dozen or so parents already in September and October before conference days during their teen time. Then they have their conference afternoon and evenings. And then 5th and 6th grade are booked out through December with conferences during their teen times or before school to try and accommodate people who didn't get a slot. We're trying to decide whether it's better to meet as a team. Some parents prefer that. We did do a survey last year after conferences, and it was about 50-50. Some parents would prefer to meet with a whole team of teachers. Others just want to see the 1 or 2 teachers that they feel they need to connect with. So we're trying to provide a little of both, and still working to make that a better system.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question. So standard-based report cards, this 1 through 4, is that just in 5th and 6th grade? So it sounds like you have grades
Yes.
in 7th grade?
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
this year it's 5th and 6th.
Or if there's a little correlation between all that interest?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Although 6th grade did not have standards-based report cards last year, they had traditional, and they still had a high number of requests for conferences. Maybe age has something to do with it.
Coming out of Clyde Brown, everybody's still used to it.
Some of the events that we had to try and engage parents and community members came out of the library. Mrs. Diver is wonderful about collaborating with teachers and organizing a literary arts night and a middle school writers group. Parents came in to listen to stories that kids wrote. There was a poetry day. We had things like senior projects that involved middle school kids. Are you smarter than a fifth grader evening? There was a spelling bee. And so those are the kinds of things the teachers are talking about. How can we do more of those? And finally, I would say the teachers are really the key to our school improvement. It's people, it's not programs. So a huge focus is on developing the capacity of our teachers to be leaders, to set lofty goals through their PLC process. They all have student learning goals and professional learning goals, and we've been discussing those in the last 2 weeks. And encouraging teachers to connect with teachers outside of Millis and have professional learning networks, whether it's online through Twitter, whether it's connecting with teachers in other schools and getting together at conferences, and work and do more interdisciplinary collaboration. And I would say, lastly, co-teaching is something we're piloting at the middle school this year. We've got, I think, 4 classes that are currently being co-taught by either a teacher and a specialist or 2 teachers collaborating, and it's going really well. The response by the teachers is positive, the kids it's positive. We feel like we're able to do more Tier 1 support in the classroom when there's some co-teaching happening. So we'll be interested to see the feedback on that at the end of the school year. And I would say, I would echo Jason, I'm encouraging teachers to be leaders in the school and to co-collaborate and make decisions, shared decision making with me. They know, they're in the trenches every single day, and they know what's right for kids. And so, from my perspective, I listen to them, and I ask for their opinion and their input. And I'm just going to leave you with something that might make you smile. This is student filmed, student produced, student edited. It's a rough cut, as Danielle Mannion calls it, but it was done in her TV production class. And it was their idea to do something around our our school logo and our common expectations. So we're hoping it's going to come up and play for you.
One nation, Oh, Ed, good to see you there. How was me? My name? Oh, I'm Bryson. I've been here for 3 years. It's practically my second home. And you'll feel that way too when you walk in. Hey, Mr. Dolman. Hey, Mr. Red. Here at Millis Middle School, our motto is respect, accept, and inspire. A lot of the students here at Millis Middle School give their teacher lots of respect. Just like this. I mean, look around. Everyone's giving their teacher so much respect. I mean, me, I'm not being that respectful right now. I'm interrupting the class. Now for some wise words from my fellow students.
In a nutshell, respect is very important to make friends, people, work, money, and a good life.
I think respect means to accept the rules that has already been set for us and not talking back to your teachers.
And I think that it means to be kind and nice to everyone and think about what you say before you say it.
Accepting means to me just accepting people for who they are, whether it's what they wear or what they like, or letting someone sit with you at lunch, just being nice in general and never purposely just letting someone be mean to someone else.
I think to accept something is to say, hey, you should be treated as everyone else and stuff, and everyone is equal and everyone is loved.
Inspire me to set an example for others.
Inspire means to make things possible. Inspire means to be a role model.
That's good.
That's
Thank you.
Good.
But they're working on expanding that. So.
We've asked enough.
Thank you for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There's that. Chairman's report, there isn't really a report, other than Denise asked me to just mention, dovetails the school building, that for people at home, that the project is moving forward as planned. However, as people probably know, there's 3 articles at town meeting that will have an impact on the project. And so people really should get out, educate themselves on the impact of each of the articles, and most importantly, turn out on November 6th for town meeting. Go school committee announcements. Carrie?
I'm good.
Steve?
I'm good.
Jen?
All set. Thank you.
All right. No old and new business, no correspondence. We do not have executive session, so I will take a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much. Our next meeting is town meeting on November 6th, and then we meet here on November 7th.